Indiana football, get another 4-star recruitment from Fort Wayne, Mike. I know you don't follow this particular aspect of IU sports a lot, but in your coverage, but the recruiting, the importance of continuing to see that recruiting level go up for Indiana is just incredible, because that is the basis for success in college football. Is recruiting, what we just talked about that, and more specifically offensive line, things like that. This is a big 4-star lineman that they got. It's just continuing the importance of what Tom Allen has done and solidifying that this is a program that is going to continue winning.
Sporting News did a ranking of the top coaches in college football. Bill Bender, our terrific college football writer, compiled it. And several staff members who deal with college football voted. And I will say that I was surprised that Tom Allen was ranked in the top 25 coaches, which is impressive enough considering IU's football history. But I would have had him higher, did have him higher on my ballot. My theory on college coaching in general, I compare it to playing golf. And sometimes you go out and you play your local public course, and you shoot whatever you shoot. And then sometimes if you get lucky, or you get a friend, or you maybe have a couple of $100 burning in your pocket or whatever, you can play Pebble Beach or somewhere like that. Or you have a friend who gets you on at Pine Valley, one of those brutal courses. And it's not the same. So like doing what Tom Allen is doing at Indiana is just way harder in a lot of ways than what Nick Saban is doing at Alabama. I mean, it is. Now, to sustain the greatness at the level that Saban is doing is just ridiculous. But that initial championship team that Saban built at Alabama, not as hard as becoming a consistent factor at Indiana in the Big Ten, where just history hasn't said that you do that. And that history plays into every recruit's mind. If I go to Indiana, wait a second, they haven't won in how long? Michigan, they're there every year, or Ohio State, they're there. That's something that you have to overcome the minute you make the first phone call or send the first letter or whatever. You're behind that 8 ball. And Tom Allen has pushed Indiana football ahead of that 8 ball. He's past that now. And the only, the obstacles now are Ohio State and Michigan to a lesser extent because they've beaten them, but Ohio State and programs like that Penn State that have that tradition of success, that when their phone call comes in or their letter arrives, the kid's like, wow, Ohio State's calling me. Ohio State sent me a letter. That's different. That it's you're already starting ahead of the game. So what Allen is doing, what his staff members are doing, unbelievably impressive. And it's been a real pleasure and to watch and in following the program from the fairly close distance. It's also been a pleasure to watch him do all of that without having to resort to anything that one would consider untoward or dislikable. I mean, he's
shenanigans.
Yeah, I mean, he's been the perfect IU football coach. From the standpoint of how he comports himself, how he goes about recruiting, how he goes about coaching his men, how he deals with the media. I haven't seen anything that you would find and say, boy, I don't really like what's happening there. That's why, when I voted, I had Tom Allen very close to the top of my ballot. Not number 1 or number 2, but he was pretty prominent.
Mike, what's amazing to me, and I see so many parallels to what Tom Allen is doing here to what Billy Donovan did at Florida 20 years ago. A school without basketball tradition before then, a school that was in a football first state, and Tom Allen doing it in a basketball first state. It's kind of like 20 years later, you're seeing, just so many similarities.
That's a great point. It really is. The difference with Billy is that he came at a time when the money that had been produced through football, that was being generated through football, was starting to elevate programs like Florida. And this is not to take away from winning consecutive national championships, because you still had to win them, right? And the other schools that are in that pool, Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, those programs, although their basketball programs generally were elevated at or around the same time frame, they weren't ever elevated to the very top the way Billy did. But Tom Allen, it's not, it's not as I think it's even more difficult than what Billy did, because you weren't going in. You didn't have much basketball tradition at Florida, but you were going in with the Florida brand and all that money, and and he had pedigree as well because he played in the league and he coached for Rick Pitino. Nobody really knew who Tom Allen was before he became head coach. Again, Indiana football money is good, but it's not as powerful as to sell out 60,000 seats as it is to sell out 100 like they do at Ohio State or Penn State or Michigan. So a lot of those obstacles are there for him that are, like you said, I think there's some really cool parallels with Billy Donovan in Florida, but I think it's even a harder trek for Indiana football that they've made to this point. And, obviously you have to continue that. You have to continue to win. And maybe even if you can, take it up another notch or two.
Yeah, and a great question from Chris that we can't answer, but is Coach Allen at IU for life? He has that connection, being from Indiana, and it does mean so much to him. And it's in the Big Ten, in the Big Ten East. I'm like, well, where else are you going to go? There's not a lot of places that are going to go that are going to be above that if you've created a program in Indiana where it's competitive year in, year out. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there are places, but there's very few that are above that if you do that. So I don't know that he would want to leave. But you can't predict the future. Yeah,
it's hard to predict the future. I think the question that he would, that may or may not eventually come to him is to be at a place where you can compete for a national championship. I don't, as great as Indiana has become under Tom, I don't think any of us is sitting here thinking that they're likely to win a national championship. It's just, again, that reality has been.
Maybe with the 12-team playoff, it might be a little bit easier.
A little, yeah. I think that'll be interesting to see, Kevin, to see how, right now, and I've had this argument with Bill Bender, who I mentioned before. Bill says that, the reason Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson get all the best guys, is because all those best guys then turn into NFL players, and all the high school recruits know that it will help them get to the NFL. And my answer to that is that, hey, from 2010 to 2015 or 16, every top recruit that went to Kentucky flourished and made it to the NBA, just about every single one. There were very few that slipped by the wayside. And then by 2016 or 17, it didn't matter that Anthony Davis became the 1 overall pick and John Wall became the 1 overall pick and all that stuff. And Karl Towns. I mean, guys start going elsewhere anyway. Some to Duke, some to places like LSU, et cetera. It didn't matter. So I'm not sure that he's right. I think the fact that those players out there know, if I go to Oklahoma, if I'm a west or southwestern kid, I go to Oklahoma. If I'm a southeastern kid, I go to Clemson or Alabama. If I'm a midwestern kid, I go to Ohio State. I mean, that's generalizing a little bit because it's not exact. But I mean, if you go to one of those 4 schools, you're almost certainly during the course of your career going to be in at least one college football playoff, and probably you'll be in at least 75% of the time if you go to one of those 4 schools, with the way it's been historically. And that's what those guys now know, or what their history has been as they've grown into prospects. And that's not necessarily true if you expand it to 12. Maybe those players start to say, well, I can go to good old State U here, and it's close to home. It's not too close to home. It's close to home, and I can still make the playoff, and that'll be cool. My family can see me without having to get on a plane or whatever. Maybe that happens. I think it'll be interesting to see, honestly, Kevin, whether or not we see that that split in the elite recruits, whether they start to consider schools beyond that quartet.